there was a time frame in my life where I bought a few books. I forget the guy's name, but I was the obnoxious guy in his early to mid 30s telling everybody I was going to be retired at 40.
Okay.
I'm not retired. There you are.
How's it going?
Good.
What's happening?
All right. Is it going to mess things up? I don't have headphones on.
No, you're all good.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, headphones are for you.
Should I put some on so at least it looks like I look cool?
You look good. Did you see the little price action we have going on today?
Yeah, I just tried to buy some. I should have. I missed 109.
You missed 109. It's 119 now.
Yeah, I know. I'm well aware. I'm well aware. I just lost about 10%. I got what I deserve, as you like to say.
Everyone gets it at the price they deserve.
Get it at the price I deserve.
Oh my goodness. I've got another buddy that I'm needling. He's not off zero yet. And he's like, I'm going to get it at under 100. And he's waited. And at 108, I said, you better jump. And he said,
Yep.
no, I'm going to wait. And it jumped up again.
Well,
Unlucky.
tell them when it's going to go to 100 to let me know.
Yeah, I think we're all going to buy it before
Right.
then.
Right.
Oh, it's funny. All righty, let's jump in. Mr. D, this is episode 5 for me on my new venture of a podcast. And today I have Mike Derenthal, who is a real estate agent who has developed a reputation for being in the business for 2 decades. And appreciate you coming on the podcast today, and excited to talk about your journey and learn a little bit about your knowledge and your lessons.
Likewise. You'll take. I give you a lot of credit or a lot of blame. We'll wait and see.
Let's see. Hopefully, it's the credit.
Yeah.
So,
I'm kidding.
Mike, you've built a reputation in Orlando real estate, as I said, over 2 decades. Let's start there. How did you first get into the business, and what did you believe about money and wealth back then?
Well, my background was engineering construction, with another degree in finance, of all things. So I and kind of stumbled into real estate like a lot of people do. Realized I had a passion for it. I loved it, and part of what was so attractive to me was, the hands-on, tangible aspect of it as an asset,
Right.
right? Which I know we'll get into that a little bit, and also it was bought my first house. Like back then, I was probably early 30s, 54 now, so it was 25 years ago,
Okay.
late maybe 29. And I started getting involved with investment real estate,
All right.
buying properties. Sometimes I'd fix them up and improve them, and we would buy them and hold them as rentals. And so I could go find this tangible asset that was I enjoyed the valuation, trying to play the game of figuring out what it's worth and get it at the right price, and then financially model how it was going to perform. Back in those days, I was using debt, taking a mortgage out on properties. This was back when you could go buy an investment property for 10% down,
Mm-hmm.
and it's hard to pull off these days, and get a mortgage and rent it out and make a little money. Not a whole lot, but most of your asset growth was going to be in the appreciation of the real estate.
Absolutely. So firstly, I want to back up there. And everyone's using AI these days. And just before I was waiting for you to get on the call, I did a little AI background research on you. And it says that you have an MBA.
I do. MBA in finance.
I need to give you credit because you know the joke about how do you know if someone has an MBA? They tell you. And you are one of the very few people that I know that has an MBA that I actually didn't know you had an MBA. I knew you had a degree in finance, but MBAs, people like to tout that around.
Well,
So,
the chemical engineering degree was actually a lot harder to get than the MBA.
okay.
But
All right.
I don't pull that one out either unless I feel like I need to kind of you know I gotta knock someone down a peg. I might pull that one out.
Okay, so before you got into the real estate investing, what was your sort of mindset, when you were studying the MBA? What was the kind of the knowledge back then about growing wealth and building wealth?
Well, it was, I spent, I bounced around college a little bit. It took 7 years to get a chemical engineering degree.
Okay.
One of the, that was a challenging degree. That was a hard degree to get. And then I went back a couple years later to get my MBA, um, because I knew I, wanted to, you know, run a business someday. I know I kind of had an entrepreneur's heart. The thing that stuck with me most with going back and get my MBA, and it's, some people, like I said, like to kind of tout they have an MBA. It's got, some circles and esteem built around it for whatever reason. But the what I learned in those 2 years that was most valuable was basic finance, and not just basic stuff, all sorts of different finance and pricing, and learning about markets. It struck me that I had busted my behind getting that chemical engineering degree, and nowhere along the way had anybody said these kids need to be taking finance. Basic finance is a requirement. Arguably, it should be happening in middle school or high school. And the concepts themselves are not rocket science. It's a fairly straightforward, set of theories and practices, and but it's, unless you make the decision to go into that you know sort of study, or if you have somebody in your life at a younger age that decides they're going to explain basic finance principles to you, I think it's a crime that so many people in this world do not get that. I think that's a lot more important than learning a foreign language, and a lot of the other stuff. And so that's what struck me. And I was like, holy cow! All of a sudden, it gives you a way to kind of see the world and decision making and risk taking and all that stuff in a financial
Right.
perspective.
Yeah, I would say probably one of the biggest driving reasons for me to start this podcast to try and spread this information out is that there is a huge lack of financial literacy in the world. And we could pick bones as to whether or not Keynesian, Austrian economics, all of the finance things are perfect, but most people just live their lives completely oblivious to what's actually going on in the world around them with regards to money. I think that's one of the critical things is people spend 30, 40,000 hours of their life making money, and no one even spends 100 hours of their life trying to learn how to keep it and multiply it or grow it, or you know
Yeah.
along those
And
lines.
the principles are not that complicated,
Yeah,
and but they can be life changing if
absolutely.
if you understand it.
So would you say that I mean, other than the basic kind of concepts of economics, finance, money, was there a lot of translation from that degree going into kind of the real estate investing side of things?
Um, you know, the tools that you use in real estate investing, and probably most 90% of investment decisions out there is could be learned in a few hours.
Okay.
You can learn all sorts of complex, models, and I forget the term.
Formulas and sharp
You know,
ratios and
yeah, I mean, you can get all in, price, pricing risk, and all that kind of stuff, and internal rate of return, and you don't need any of that kind of stuff. It's not that complicated.
yeah,
Time
and
value
so
of money, and valuations is in pricing curves is pretty, pretty basic theories.
right, right. And at what point did you start kind of questioning some of those assumptions that you had about money previously?
Well, early on, first you come out of college, you get into, you start earning an income, you get your first step is when you want to buy that first house,
Hmm.
and the whole industry and the whole, I didn't realize at the time, everything is built around debt.
All right.
And the idea that it's, that a mortgage is a good type of debt to get. Everything else is, for the most part, is something to stay away from.
Hmm.
My entire industry, I've been in residential, resale for 21 years now. That entire industry is built around debt and
Right.
mortgages, and the it, started buying our first house and bought a second house, and these rental properties using debt and mortgages. And
Hmm.
somewhere along the way, my my ex-wife had got us into a Dave Ramsey course where we were
Okay.
going to, pay off the student loans and really hunker down, and that kind of was probably an eye opener for me to really start understanding the implications of debt.
Right.
And so that was probably when the first light bulb went off for me. And then you know further on down the road, it got to a point where started pursuing living a life without debt.
Okay.
And that was okay. And I know we'll talk a little bit more. Starting to treat real estate as a store of value
Hmm.
and a good investment vehicle as well, because of its appreciation.
Yeah, absolutely. So would you say you kind of went from the Robert Kiyosaki mindset of, good debt, let's take out as much debt as we can, and, houses are always going to go up. And then
Yep.
you kind of move the pendulum the other way, more of the conservative kind of, let's reduce the risk profile a little bit, and not have so much of this debt.
Well, and yeah, yes to that. And the other thing to keep in mind, I bought my first house in 2000, got into real estate in 2004. First few years in real estate, it was gangbusters. I was like, hey, I love this business. I still do 21 years later. But that's, everybody knows what happened after, shortly thereafter.
Hmm.
And everybody was making money in real estate. You buy it. And so I was experiencing it at a time when real estate was becoming quickly overvalued.
Hmm.
In hindsight, we see that now and understand what caused it. But then I also got to experience the business when vast majority of my clients, starting in '08 and for the next four years or so, were lives are falling apart. Real estate market crashed. There was a big debt bubble, and so I kind of saw that side of it too, something that supposedly was never going to happen. So that's probably another important part of my journey.
Yeah. And so finally, I just, a memory popped into my head. I don't know if you can remember. For context, for the people that are listening to this, Mike used to be the top agent in the office that I used to kind of manage. And I would ask Mike from time to time to, take the rest of the agents under his wing and give them, some insights, and spread his knowledge. And I remember him telling me once that, in this time period of when you were investing and buying real estate, you thought you were going to retire in 2 or 3 years and be a multi-millionaire. And, this is just the easiest thing in the world.
There was a time frame in my life where I bought a few books. I forget the guy's name, but I was the obnoxious guy in his early to mid 30s, telling everybody I was going to be retired at 40.
Okay.
I'm not retired.
So, so let's go back to, so the first 4 years of your real estate journey. Obviously, we know what caused it now, looking back. But was there any sort of thinking like, hey, this is crazy? Like, how can, the price of real estate just be going through the roof? And, what was kind of going through your mind at that stage?
Yeah, I specifically remember at some point, but probably in the '05, '06 timeframe. I was part of a larger brokerage back then. I was still relatively green, knew the business, doing okay with it, but had not been around for a long time. And I remember sitting in a meeting one time. We would have these sales meetings where they'd bring in different vendors, and they had a lending team come in there, a room full of probably 30 agents,
Hmm.
talking about this loan program. It was literally called Pick a Rate. You could or pick a payment. I'm sorry, pick a payment loan program. And it was one of those deals where you could go in there and say, I don't want to make a payment for the first 6 months or 12 months. And that was at the height of things where people were buying homes was 0% down. They were overvaluing properties and actually giving people money, uh, giving buyers money back at closing
Oh
to
my
put
word.
improvements into the house. And so people were buying an asset that was already overvalued, which nobody knew at the time. But then they were saying, here's extra money because we're all going to just keep counting on these values keep ramping up. And so it's a no-brainer. And I remember coming home from that meeting and talking to my wife, and it's like that was the first time when I was like, something doesn't feel right.
Just didn't make sense. Grandma's old, wisdom just wasn't cutting
Didn't
it.
didn't make sense, right? Didn't make sense. And at the time, nobody knew the extent of the problem. And I was limited to thinking, well, that lender is probably going to, somebody's going to lose some money.
Hmm.
Little did we realize it was a systemic issue.
And so this was after you have an MBA in finance and you're selling property, you've got a couple really, investment properties under your belt, and you're kind of building your portfolio. And you get in a room with a lender who's basically saying to you, take your pick. We'll whatever the house costs, we'll give you the money, and we'll sort out how you're going to pay for it, kind of down the line. We'll figure
Yep.
that out because
Yep.
we're secure. The price of the property is always going up.
Yep.
Pretty crazy. Was there any sort of inclination of that? I mean, obviously you figured out this isn't quite right, but was there any sort of pinpointing of, is this money inflation? The values are wrong. There's the lending something there. What was it that made you kind of like, hmm?
At the time, if I'm totally honest, I did not, I remember some people saying they were selling their houses and they were going to rent because the market was going to crash. And I was rolling my eyes. I was like, well, real estate doesn't come down. Fortunately, I had a wife that was a little more financially frugal. And
Okay.
when we were making our purchases, we did stick to old school rules, make sure that
Hmm.
we're, and we were, I was always able to buy stuff. Typically, I'd get a good price on something,
Hmm.
kind of, and we make sure we had some equity down in the property. And, it saved our butt, saved our
All right.
butt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's jump forward a little bit now. How did you first come across Bitcoin, and what was your kind of initial reaction to Bitcoin?
I wish I could remember when first heard people talking about it. It's been a few years, and I know you and I have talked about it off and on probably what 2 or 3 years
A
now.
couple of years, yeah.
And so it predates that. I don't remember exactly when, but it was one of these, some sort of, electronic money is probably how I
Hmm.
looked at it, and I didn't really have any interest to it. And I've always been very predominantly real estate focused on my investments.
Right.
And I know real estate. That's what I do for a living. And I've got a decent eye for it, know what to look for, that kind of stuff. So I've always been comfortable with it, and I've always, that's kind of where I've put my focus. And but then you and I started talking about it a couple years ago over breakfast one morning, and I've had a few other friends that the past probably last 3 or 4 years that have bit my ear on it a few times, and I've
Okay.
really thinking they were crazy.
So I'm not
And
the only one.
you're not the only one. No, no. My old college roommate was he was he was in this a few years ago, and I remember you know talking about it, and it was right before. Gosh, it was probably before COVID because COVID went down to 60
No, it went
down.
down quite a bit. If you're talking 2000, I mean, in 2021 or two, kind of dip of the bear market got to about 16,000. That was
Okay,
after
okay.
COVID.
So
Yeah.
maybe it was right after that when the dip that went down to 60. I remember thinking, oh my gosh, my buddy just lost his shirt.
Yeah, it went up to like 69 and then dropped to 16.
Okay,
Yeah.
maybe that's what I'm thinking, but it dropped, and I remember thinking, oh man, I wonder how he's doing. I was like, because he was,
Oh, is he deep in?
and I think so. Yeah, I think so. I don't know his exact numbers, but he
Right,
was,
right.
he was all about it. And I told him a few weeks ago I'm gonna see him. We get together for my old college roommates. We get together once a year. I said, all right, when I see you next in a few weeks, I'm gonna be ready for a lot of I told you so's.
But you were thinking I told you so when it went down to 16. So
Not then. No,
not
not then.
then.
Not then.
Okay.
That's since you and I have been, you kind of got me onto it. I started really digging in and reading up and trying to absorb as much as I could.
And so, yeah, at that reading into it, what was the turning point? What was the moment you kind of realized this isn't a scam? It's actually, changes a lot about what I thought about money.
Yeah, I think I mean, you and I talked about it. You started slow dripping me with some, podcasts and web links and stuff like that. And the more I dug into, the more I got, and more it intrigued me. And I think before we got on that, I was trying to go and I read the book, The Big Print, that fantastic book. I've
Okay,
referred that out now to several other people I know.
that's awesome.
And a little background there too. I went through a phase probably 20 years ago where I was reading every economic theory book I could get my hands on. Was kind of an economics geek for a few years. Just really enjoyed it and understand the different models and history of economics. The One of the things in the big print book I think that caught my attention was there's a graph that he references in there. I looked it up as by a guy named Jesse Myers put something out on
Mm-hmm.
X that the author of the big print reference, and it was basically showing the total global asset breakdown
Mm-hmm.
of his 900 trillion or whatever, all the stuff in the world the asset classes are worth. And that one was kind of an eye opener for me because it showed kind of, how much of the world's wealth is in equities and how much is in real estate and how much is in collectibles and how much is in gold. And you saw a small portion of Bitcoin. And when you start thinking about the growth in Bitcoin and if that value of all those asset classes is basically going to move,
Mm-hmm.
it moves around. And where does it go? And that's when things kind of started to click, and I started kind of looking at it a little bit different way.
Yeah. So the Bitcoin thesis is that all this dollar stuff, it cannot sit in currency because currency just loses value, gets diluted, gets debased. And so this currency needs to find a home in stocks, bonds, real estate, and that makes up the bulk of kind of the 900 trillion. It's kind of evenly spread around, 300, 300, 300 roughly. It's not super accurate. And then you got Bitcoin, which is a tiny, tiny percentage of global wealth. It's only a $2.3 trillion market cap right now. And it's funny, I was talking to my brother about this yesterday on a podcast, and he was saying the biggest problem that normies have, we call people that aren't Bitcoin as normies, is this unit bias thing where they think, well, $100,000 for one Bitcoin is completely overpriced. But when you look at that, against the backdrop of the global sort of spread of where all the wealth is, it's a tiny proportion. And if Bitcoin is right in the sense that it has quote unquote fixed the money and becomes the best store of value, it's going to just, in theory, eat up all of the monetary premium that real estate has, and then obviously bonds and stocks are going to, it's going to move into that. So
Yeah.
what was it about that kind of like shook you?
Well, it was more, we've kind of not talked about one of the biggest uh, kind of thing hangups that not hangups, but one of the biggest points of discussion you and I have had is I've always looked at real estate as a safe investment
Right.
if you buy it right, because you own something and it's tangible, it's not going anywhere. It has utility to it, and so that's something I've always looked at. And I'm here in the state of Florida, so a lot of we have a fairly robust real estate market and a destination that people are going to keep coming, and there's going to continue to be a you know a supply and demand balance here. I think it's going to be pretty healthy for it as an asset class.
Just like in 2008.
Well, just like in 2008, right? Exactly. The but if 2008 is, even if you look at 2008 is a blip that was caused by by lending standards and free money that inflated the market. Real estate has, and you and I have talked about this, has over time maintained a fairly steady, predictable rate of appreciation.
Rate of return, yeah.
And then I know we talked about that. And I've done okay with real estate, but then after you and I talked, and I started reading about Bitcoin more and realized I went back and kind of looked at my real estate activities over the years. And yes, my investments have appreciated with the market. I've done okay on usually buying the right kind of property. But then when I started really thinking about it, a lot of the value that I had made and the return on that investment had happened because I was buying depressed properties
Hmm.
and improving them. And you pointed out that, well, yeah, that's kind of like a business, right?
Right.
And then once I kind of got back up to whatever value that property was going to hold, then I was really basically just kind of seeing an asset appreciate with the rate of inflation. And that
Right.
was that was my big aha moment.
Okay. And so, yeah, what you had thought of, the appreciation measured in dollars going up, that was more attributed to your skills and not really paying too much attention to the fact that the money's being debased, the money's being printed,
Right.
and there's just a flood of more dollars in the system that are chasing these kind of quote unquote more scarce assets and rising
Right.
the entire
Arguably,
entire.
that increase in the print of money was shown up in the appreciation of my real estate, which when you get back to it is really, what are you really making if the, if that appreciation matches the increase in the money supply?
Was there any connection between that and the fact that, okay, I've needed now maybe think that the money's actually broken? Has that kind of
Yes.
occurred to you?
Yeah.
Tell me more about that.
There's a book I read years ago, and I don't have it. I couldn't find it at the house here, but it's called "This Time Is Different,"
Hmm.
and I think the subtitle I wrote down, "This Time Is Different: 8 Centuries of Financial Foil."
Okay.
And if for anybody that's a history geek or an economics geek, fantastic read. And it goes back over the course of history and talks about all these different financial uh, booms and busts that have happened not just here in the U.S. but globally.
Hmm.
Uh, and including like the tulip market bust back. I was at the Netherlands or wherever that was back in the 1800s, and it was one of the most formative books I've ever read because it really put things in perspective and said that these financial boom and bust
Cycles.
events cycles,
Hmm.
they're always preceded with a large part of the market saying, well, this time it's different.
Hmm.
The housing market isn't really inflated because blah blah blah. The tulip market isn't really inflated because blah blah blah. And his history shows that these things all follow the same pattern.
Hmm.
And I think with that, with an understanding of that, and then you really start to go back and start to understand what has happened with our monetary policy, dating back to the over 100 years ago. That there's I don't see it's history. Know your history lest you repeat it. Right.
Yeah, absolutely. So you spent a career helping people build wealth through real estate. How do you now compare real estate and Bitcoin as long-term stores of value?
I'm still getting on Bitcoin.
Okay.
I mean, as you know, I'm not. Because and I think this is something else. I was thinking about this the other day. The you know the it would be interesting to see if you could somehow gauge uh, different people's interest and commitment to Bitcoin based on their age.
Hmm.
My parents' generation, they're approaching their 80s. The chances are better that we're going to see a monetary reset of some point in your lifetime and not theirs. And that factors into, I think, somebody's uh, willingness to shift gears and really kind of look at this as like a new store of value.
Right.
I think I'm somewhere in between, and I see it. But our our financial system is broken right now. I recognize that, and now I think there's people kind of in the other people like me that think, okay, is this gonna fall apart?
You're
In the
talking
next
about the
5.
entire financial system?
Yeah, well, as far as the dollar and the stability of that, and treating and what that could, if the dollar falls apart, then there's going to be some implications on my real estate,
Sure.
right?
So let me ask you this. How would you explain to your daughters who are in kind of college age now, how do you explain to them that the financial system is broken?
I'm not, I haven't gotten there yet. We
Okay.
talked about it a little bit, um, and really what they hear from me is stay away from debt,
Okay.
stay away from debt, and at all costs, stay away from debt.
Even if the dollar is going to, in theory, devalue, get debased, and that debt's going to be, there's going to be hyperinflation, and the debt's going to be easy to pay off.
Uh, Perhaps, but when you're talking to somebody that's, and my daughter's in or late teens, early 20s, they're still out there getting their first job. I think it's a little premature for them to, I'm going to start planting the seeds,
Hmm.
and they are, they're ahead of the curve on, financial concepts from their peers for sure.
Hmm.
But as far as, I want to be careful about the picture I'm painting, as far as there's enough other stuff going on in their world right now, our world, that you don't want to paint a picture of doom and gloom in all aspects.
One of the things that Bitcoiners think, and kind of their thesis is, fix the money, fix the world. And a lot of the issues that the youth are facing today, and quite frankly, society are facing today, if you kind of trace it back upstream, it almost all of them. I can't say all of them because that would be, there's no such thing as, complete, but um, a large majority of the issues that are happening in the world today are as a result of fiat currency and broken money. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, yeah. The you sent me that link to what's the guy's name, Mahler?
Jack Malice, yeah,
Matt,
yeah.
yeah, that was pretty powerful,
Okay. What did you take
especially.
away from that? Because my previous episode was my buddy and I actually just commenting on that video and showing all the slides.
Yep,
I think it does a great job of highlighting the fact that Bitcoin is not just number go up technology, and we want, kind of, as you said, bottle service and Miami yachts. This is a complete, the numbers don't lie, even though the numbers do lie in terms of what the numbers we're getting, but the trends are there.
so my the and this is where I'm still trying to get my, I think, get my, call it my strategy or my hands around this, where I still have some reluctance to jump in 100%, because I'm still trying to figure out how the powers that be adjust to the changes that Bitcoin would bring about if things go as smoothly as the models suggest they should. You know,
Okay, a couple of things that I would unpack there. One, I don't think it's going to be smooth, because what Bitcoin does is it removes an incredible amount of power out of the
yes,
hands of the powers that be.
yes,
Um, that would come further in your Bitcoin journey in terms of understanding the mechanics of how it works, and we're not going to kind of get into that today. I don't believe it's going to be smooth because anyone that gets into government, red, blue, any government in the world, what they actually fighting for is control over the money printer.
absolutely.
And so I don't believe any human that has access to the money printer is going to give up access to the money printer without a
And
big fight.
that's a big, and when I say smooth, yeah, I totally agree with you 100%. So I don't know what that looks like. And I don't know if that gets, if, at the end of the day, like I said, people don't give up their power. There's, again, you can go back to that graph I referenced earlier that shows you, the asset buckets globally.
Hmm.
And if you presume that there's, those also represent power buckets, they
Yeah,
essentially do.
right.
When enough people realize that their power is, their control is at risk,
Hmm.
something's going to happen that's awfully hard to predict. And so that gets back to, how do I talk to a younger generation about it?
Hmm.
I think, as a dad and somebody that's in his mid 50s, we've got an obligation to educate and say, look, here's what monetary policy really has done. Here's how it's really working. There's the official narrative you're going to get in school, and from, what the government and these industries and everybody that wants to, keep the economy going on credit. Here's the narrative you're going to get from them.
Hmm.
Here's what's really happening.
Okay.
What unfolds next, I don't know, but I can tell you my kids are definitely informed to that extent.
All right. And are they informed enough to the fact to this in the sense that you think that owning Bitcoin is less of a risk than not owning Bitcoin?
I would,
And
is
I
owning
don't
Bit.
mean 100% allocated, but
Yeah, yeah. No, I hear you. Yeah, I no, that's where I'm at right now. That's where I'm at right now. And if I was younger, it would be a lot easier to, and I had a larger, more time in front of me. it'd be
Hmm.
a lot easier to say, I'm going to put the vast majority of my investment activities towards something like Bitcoin. Because what do you have to lose when you're in your 20s and 30s?
Yeah, I mean,
It's
and that's a fair point. I mean, there's,
yeah,
you as your generation, you've kind of grown up on real estate's been your windfall in terms of wealth generation. But as a history buff yourself, you know that every civilization that came before us messed with their money, inflated their money, and ultimately, lost
right.
because it just history repeats itself, as you said, and you can only debase the currency so much until the people have had enough, and then they choose a different money. And I think the exciting thing is that there's never been an asset in the history of money where you can opt out of this system, where we believe it's unstoppable because it's decentralized and secure, and it's scarce.
That's the part I'm not convinced of yet, 100%.
You're not convinced on the fact that Bitcoin's decentralized or that no one can
No,
break it.
no, I understand that it's decentralized, but as far as being able to opt out, my hunch is that it's still, you're now seeing enough institutions and governments and whatnot that are kind of starting to hedge their own bets and
Hmm.
and and put investment activity towards Bitcoin.
Right.
But as far as the idea of being able to opt out of, whatever marketplace or society you're a part of, I think, and that sounds good in theory, it will be harder in practice for most people to pull off.
Well, when what I'm saying is opt out, I'm saying more that you don't have to invest in those big buckets that you had to before in terms of being able to try and preserve your wealth. You now have another option that is
Absolutely.
not that doesn't have counterparty risk like all the others do because of the fact that it's completely decentralized. So the rules are the rules, and the
Right.
incentive of the people that have opted into this game are that they're not going to change the rules.
Hmm.
And even if the incentives are now that it's grown, the network has grown so big that it's basically like a Trojan horse coming into Wall Street now. The incentives are we better get on board with this as opposed to trying to break it because it's going to be cheaper for us to get on board than try and financially break this.
Right.
So
Right.
that I think is what's fascinating. What it's gonna be fascinating for society to see how this plays out,
Yeah.
because as you said in the big print, I mean, the government is just running crazy numbers now in terms of its deficits and its debt. I mean, we're running a $2 trillion a year deficit. It's $1 trillion in 150 days. I don't know what that is, but you can go and we
It's a
the
lot, isn't
government
it?
shut down for a day, and look what Bitcoin did. It jumped.
Yep.
But so that's the whole thing. It's like we're 37 and a bit $1 trillion in debt, and they've got three options, and they're only going to pick one. They're not going to default. They can't pay it off. Those are the two options. The other option is the third one, which is they're just going to debase the hell out of the currency in order to do it. And I think what's going to happen is more and more people are going to wake up to this scam of US treasuries being, okay, this was the bedrock of global finance, the 10-year treasury bond. And yes, it pays you back nominally, but what you can buy with that return, with that 4 or 5% return bond in 10 years, is nowhere near the rate of purchasing power, keeping up with purchasing power. And so there's now this new asset where everyone has to play by the rules, and the rules are no one gets to change the rules. There's no centralized party. So I think that's a fascinating thought when you
It's
kind of
it's fascinating. I love reading it and thinking about it, and it's how it plays out. I guess that's the 900 trillion dollar question.
sure, absolutely, because in at the end of the day, it's basically just a protocol. It's like the English language. You can't ban the English language. You can try and change it, or use chess as an example. The rules of chess are the rules of chess. It's simple. If you run a node, you cannot be censored in a transaction peer to peer. Now, obviously, they can start blocking off ramps in terms of getting Bitcoin into fiat currency at
Right.
exchanges.
Right.
Fair, but with the incentive would be then you're going to create this entire black market that no one can trace, and it's just happening digitally peer to peer. And then so the incentive would then be, okay, I need to actually treat these, the people that are doing this better. Otherwise, they are going to, go to a jurisdiction that is. Okay, so let's kind of wrap it up now. Let me ask you a question. Go back to kind of just basic financial principles. What would you say that people think about finance that just isn't so? What would be a common misconception that most people have?
Well, I'm in real estate, so I can't go on the record and say that getting a mortgage is a bad idea. Just
So you completely against mortgages? I
no,
mean, not
no,
from a business standpoint, but like from your
no.
personal.
I'm not. I'm not completely against mortgages. Um, if it was, but I do think there's, um, I think the old school rules, 25% down, have some skin in the game, have some equity. I think that's, and the market kind of shifted back to that after the financial crash,
Hmm.
and we've kind of slipped away from it again. I'm now seeing, some, a few, 100% finance deals come across from
Hmm.
time to time. It's like, okay, here we go again.
Wall Street's
So
hungry.
what's that?
Wall Street is hungry.
Wall Street is hungry, right? Wall Street is hungry, and people have
They
short memories.
they can't help themselves.
They can't. So that part is, I see that going on. But as far as, financial beliefs out there that I think it's just overall a lack of, we've got, you know, we've got a world that's built on credit,
Hmm.
and a world built on credit, and I could start going down a rabbit hole here about, the value of work ethic and stuff like that. And I think there's a entire uh, generation that's being told that they what they can't do and what they won't be able to afford. And I think a lot of that is I have a hard time accepting that, because I
Okay.
think there's
And
some work ethic.
if I were to push back on that and say, yes, I understand that no one wants to have sort of a negative doom and gloom outlook on life. But the reality of the situation is the numbers don't lie. As you saw in that video yesterday, what a family could achieve on a middle class income with one income could pay for, the house, maybe a vacation, mom stays at home, kind of the typical traditional uh, you know lifestyle in those days.
Right?
Now is just not possible because the two
So
lines of
let's talk about that.
median income goes this way, and average house price is completely outstripping it because of this monetary premium that the girls that are going to, your daughters are going to try and get a house at 25 or whatever, they're competing
Partly,
with BlackRock.
partly, partly. That's partly, but I don't think the whole story is being told there, because you can go back and look at the first house that my parents bought when they were, coming out of college, and it was a lot different
Hmm.
than they had a different set of expectations, that generation, as far as what was adequate,
Hmm.
and what they needed to acquire to be sufficient, than what we have now. And I see it. I mean, I sell it. And it's, and I'm gonna sound like the old guy here, but that generation and my generation, it's changed, across generations. Uh, you know, my generation would not buy an $8 coffee. My parents' generation, their first house was probably maybe 800 to 1,000 square feet. No, it was
Sure.
like 800 square feet. I've not sold an 800 square foot house to a first time buyer, um, in 21 years. So I think part of it is, it's not entirely the finance. So I have a hard, I push back. I do push back on that a little bit. I sound like the old guy, but
Shit, that's because I don't think there are too many 800 square foot houses.
that's because of social expectations, and nobody, people wouldn't see that as an adequate type of house, because they think they have to have a 3 bedroom, 2 bath house with, a 2 car garage, so they can have the new car that's bought on credit. I mean, it's just a lot has changed since in the last 50 years, of home ownership. So it's not just that. It's not as simple as housing has become unaffordable and people don't make enough money. There's lifestyle choices and changes that have happened that have contributed to that as well.
Okay.
I'll get off my old guy high horse.
I want to see you. I want to see your daughters buy an 800 square foot house in Orlando.
Well, they're keeping an eye out.
Good luck.
They're looking.
I don't think there's too many out there. And the ones that maybe come across, you and I both know you don't want them to be living in that area. So good luck with that. All right, last question for tonight. Would you say you have been orange pilled, or do you feel like you're still kind of working through that process?
I don't know. So do I have to like, when, I think I've probably consumed about half of an orange of a pill so far.
It's just
Justin,
working its way in,
it's working
digesting.
its way in. I'm still nibbling on the other half.
And you're off zero, which is great.
Yeah.
That's good, and you're learning about self custody.
Yeah.
So that's fantastic. I would
Yeah.
love to bookmark this talk, and maybe circle back in a year's
Let's
time
do
and
it.
and,
Because
and
if you
see
got me
where
on your podcast, 6 months ago, I would have been you'd see a huge change on the curve.
what's been the best book or the best information that got you to kind of which
Definitely the big print.
big
I
print.
read a few different books. The big print, I've shared that with a lot of people. Even if you're wherever you are on Bitcoin, the big print is really, most of that book is a history on economics and kind of financial, how our country and our finances have evolved. The and then it drops hints, and then the last portion of it really kind of digs into Bitcoin.
Hmm.
But I think it's my daughters are both reading it.
Okay.
I think it's a fantastic history book in and of its own self. Just the way, he does a great job of kind of laying out how we got to where we are right now. Whether or not you want to, make the jump into Bitcoin or not, but it's a fantastic book. So I highly recommend that to anybody that'll listen to me.
Yeah, we're on the Titanic, and the price of a lifeboat ticket is $119,000 right now, and
108 yesterday. Damn it.
everyone gets Bitcoin at the price they deserve,
That's right.
right?
That's right.
Mike, it's been an awesome time chatting to you. I really appreciate your time. Yeah,
Keep it up, Justin.
we'll speak to you soon. I appreciate it.
Keep it up.
Don't